Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Retire in BC podcast. Today, we're discussing investment vehicles, so TFSAs, RSPs, and non-registered plans, and how they can help you build and grow your wealth.
Yeah, there are a ton of different types of investment accounts. We're going to focus on three of them today. Each one of them has totally different and unique features, and knowing when and how to use them can make a huge difference in your financial goals. We're going to walk you through that and help you understand what those differences are.
Yeah, and I think first thing we should actually tackle is that I think you and I probably both hear from clients a lot of the time that they hear the word TFSA and they think it has to be a savings account, or they think they can only invest certain things in certain products or whatever. All of these accounts that we're talking about today, they're just a wrapper. They're a vehicle that you hold your money in, and then within that account type, you can invest it, you can keep it in cash, you can hold stocks or bonds. There's some restrictions on some of them, but for the most part, think of it as just an account type that you can do whatever you want with, whether that's, holding it in cash or a real estate investment trust or anything like that.
Yeah, I hate that when they first came out, the TFSAs, that was a huge confusion because it's a tax-free savings account. And still today, actually, I do often, you probably do too, Ben. I often hear from people who think they can only have a savings type of account there. And it's just a stupid naming convention that the government decided to use. But yeah, just to stress, in fact, actually, savings is actually probably the worst possible thing to have inside a savings account. Investing is the best thing to do in those, at least I'm finding for many, many of my clients. The tax-free account's the one that they're going to touch at the very, very end. It's got the longest time horizon, and people are adding to it every year, sometimes even in retirement. So unlike a RIF converts to an RSP later, well, maybe we'll talk a little bit about
Other way
that as
around.
well.
RSP
Sorry, an
converts to a
RSP
RIF.
converts to a RIF. Thank you, Ben. But with a TFSA, so with a RIF, you're taking the money out. TFSA, often people are adding to it, and so often they are the very last thing people are going to touch, and they're adding to it on a regular basis. We want that to be the more volatile, aggressive thing. Anyhow, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here.
That's
Uh,
okay. That's okay.
yeah. So we're focusing on three investment types: non-registered accounts, TFSAs, and RSPs.
And RSPs, yeah. And so I think it makes the most sense to start with the tax-free savings account. But I actually, when I'm describing a tax-free savings account or a TFSA, I actually find it's really helpful to start with the other one, with the non-registered one, because what defines the TFSA is that it's tax-free. It's an absence of tax, which does exist in a non-registered account. So just really quick, in a non-registered account, we're going to circle back to that one. But basically, within that account, you might have those savings, which earn interest, and interest is taxable, or you might have it might be invested, and so you might be getting dividends from the stocks that you're holding, or you might later sell it and it's gone up in value and you're paying capital gains. So within that non-registered account, interest is taxable, capital gains are taxable, dividends are taxable, all at their own separate rates that we'll get into later. But really the big benefit when we get into the tax-free savings account is simply that all three of those things that I just described that are taxable, if it's held within a TFSA, it's not taxable. So no tax on interest, no tax on capital gains, no tax on dividends within the TFSA.
I find it often helpful to describe a non-registered account sort of like when you buy a house for investment purposes. I mean, what's different about a non-registered investment account is all the tracking is done for you, but the taxation part of it is the same. You make a buck, you got to pay tax on that buck. It's either through rent or through capital gains, or in the case of when you're investing in stocks or bonds, you're getting dividends or interest instead of rent. But you're also getting hopefully some growth on those stocks, just like hopefully you are on the house. And when you sell that, you're going to have to pay tax on that. So it's a very similar kind of thing. That just the difference is with an account, it's actually being tracked for you. So it's a little bit more convenient that way, and you can do it bit by bit rather than one big lump sum. But a really good point about the TFSAs. TFSAs are my favorite investment type. They're not always the best. Sometimes an RSP is the best. We'll talk about that. But generally speaking, because TFSAs have this forever free zero taxation, so forever tax-free criteria or characteristic, they are fantastic. And so for the most part, you shouldn't have non-registered investments if you have tax-free room. There may be some weird exceptions to that, but 99.99% of the time, if I find a client who's got lots of non-registered money and lots of TFSA room, we're just shifting that money over.
Yeah,
So
you've
yeah.
jumped ahead of me there, actually. I
Oh,
was
okay.
about to ask you. They're my favorite account too. And I had been about to ask, so Arnold, if they're amazing and there's no tax, why would you ever have a non-registered account? And you did touch on it there already. It's that the government puts in a limit on how much you're allowed to deposit to a tax-free savings account. If they didn't, we would all just funnel all of the money you possibly could into the TFSA
You got
or
it.
the RSP. But there would be little reason to have that non-registered account and have your investments in an account that gets taxed when you've got tax-free savings account room available. But basically, the gist of it is that for every year that you've been a tax resident of Canada, if you've been living in Canada since you've been 18, you've been generating TFSA room every year from there. Actually, funny thing, we didn't put it on our notes quite in here, but funny thing as it relates to BC residents is that you start generating TFSA room when you turn 18, but you're not a legal adult and you can't open an account until you're 19. And so BC, unlike most of the other provinces, you can open it up when you're 19 and you have 2 years worth of room. But it's just a funny little way that has worked out for us. But basically that room, if you haven't been using it, it accumulates. So it's not as though you have to use it in the year you accrue it. Right now, basically, you get 7,000 of room each year. Each January 1, your TFSA limit goes up by that amount. And that increases with inflation, but then to the nearest $500, basically.
Yeah, it's a crazy, weird formula. And if you've been paying attention, it's gone up by sort of weird amounts. It started out at $5,000 and then it went up to 5,500 and then to 10,000, then back down to 5,500. Essentially right now in the background, there's this calculation that every year in the background, the limit goes up by the amount of inflation, but they'll only ever increase it by an increment of 500. So once it crosses over halfway to that threshold, so once it gets the notional limit, once it gets over 7,250, they will bump it up to 7,500 and leave it there until it's over 7,750. So yeah, it's this weird increase, but at least unlike RSPs, it's a nice flat similar number that stays the same for a while.
Well, and it's the same for everyone,
That's
right?
right.
Rather than
Yes,
everyone
that's
getting
right.
their own
Yeah.
different number
Yeah.
for the room. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So, I mean, I love TFSAs. Arnold loves TFSAs. And really part of the reason we love them is because they're so flexible. And so whether you have a short-term like time horizon or a longer-term time horizon, they can be made to be the appropriate vehicle for you. If you've got a short time horizon and you're planning to buy a house or repair the roof or whatever within 5 years, you can invest in a tax-free savings account, or I say invest, but some of that could be in something like the cash savings vehicle, something really, really safe. And you can pull out the money when you need it without any tax implications to get it out, other than keeping track of your room, which we'll talk about in a second. Or if you've got a really long time horizon, like me, if I'm investing for my retirement, 30, 40 years down the road, a tax-free savings account is a phenomenal place to do that because I can invest very aggressively and all of the growth within that account, 100% tax-free, while it's invested and later on when I pull it out.
Well, and if you're in a situation where your income is not really high, they're actually better than RRSPs, which we'll maybe explain a bit once we get into RRSPs. But you know, knowing that you're never going to have to pay tax on it, now you don't get a tax break putting the money in, but you will never pay tax even on it coming out. That in some cases, if you're in a lower income bracket, it's actually better for you than the RSP. Or if there's any kind of risk that you might be in a higher tax bracket in retirement, the TFSA is a better deal.
Yeah.
But you talked about withdrawal, like be careful about how much you put in or withdraw. We've actually seen a handful of situations where people have gotten themselves into trouble with that. Fortunately, CRA has been actually pretty good about waiving the fees. We've had a couple of instances where clients on their own account, well, one or two where it was my fault actually, but where we've requested CRA waive the penalty, and CRA's been quite good about that. But I've also seen some where they've just refused if it's happened more than once, or other circumstances. Yeah, you want to be really, really careful about how much you contribute into there because you are capped at very strictly at certain limits.
Yeah. Well, and what I was getting to also is about like temporarily going over your limit if you've made a withdrawal. So basically, let's say you have 30,000 of TFSA room, that's your limit for the year. And let's say for argument's sake, you put in 20,000, so you haven't quite capped it out. But for that year, basically, now you've only got 10 grand remaining of room. And then let's say something comes up and you need the 20 grand, so you pull it out to buy a car or whatever it is. You will get that 20,000 of TFSA room back. You just don't get it back immediately. You don't get it back until the following calendar year, January 1. And so if within the same year, now, okay, you get an inheritance and you deposit back in thinking, I should have 30,000 of room because I pulled it all out. Well, no, you don't. Temporarily, for the remainder of the year, you still only have that 10 grand remaining. But as soon as January 1 rolls around, you get the 20 grand of room that you had withdrawn.
And that is exactly the circumstance where I've seen people actually be penalized because they were doing that, taking it out on a regular basis and putting it in on a regular basis. And yeah, they ended up accidentally going over, not realizing that they didn't get the room back until the following year.
Yeah. So for most people, it's not an issue, but just if you're doing large money movements within the same year, that can cause issues. But yeah, other than that, love TFSAs.
You know, what we didn't mention is that penalty isn't small either. The penalty for that overcontribution is 1% every single month. And so, you know, just to talk about another real life example, we had a situation once where somebody wired money from overseas into their TFSA. I can't believe the bank even let them do that, but the bank let them do it direct into their TFSA. It was, I think, around 100 grand, which was way over their limit at the time. Nobody had the limit that high. And the bank just happily let them do it. And after a few months, they realized, well, after a few months, they showed me what they had done. And I said, hey, you know, you're going to be over. So step one is you take it out right away. Step two, then you request that waiver. And that was certainly one example where we were able to get it for the client. But be careful about doing a direct deposit yourself. Make sure you're talking to a financial planner or talking to somebody at the bank that's going to put eyes on it to make sure you don't go over your limit.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, TFSAs, love them. And we already highlighted before, for the most part, I especially love them for younger people. Younger's kind of a broad range, but even anything under, 45, 50, well, everyone, but especially for younger people closer to retirement. Often we're focusing more on the RSP, which again, we'll touch on in a second. And TFSA is extra valuable for people with lower income. again, that's more a function of how the RSP works and how that's better for people with higher income than anything specific about the TFSA. But that's kind of why I like to speak about the TFSA in terms of how it works and how it doesn't work like the other ones do.
You see, I love them for old people, and that's probably, well, old people my age. That's probably a function of typically the clients that we deal with. In many situations for my clients, they've got large non-registered accounts, and just every year we're shifting $7,000, whatever we can, the maximum, shifting it into that tax-free account, because then at least on that $7,000, they're never going to pay tax. So love them for that reason.
Yeah, well, and when it comes to loving them for these people or those people or whatever, it's important to note that in pretty much every case, we're going to be recommending the TFSA and or the RSP before the non-registered account.
Exactly.
So really, this comes down to a debate of which one is better. If I can't, max them both.
That's right.
If you can, then max them both. That's almost always the right case.
Good point.
Question for you, though. I have heard that U.S. citizens should maybe or maybe not have a TFSA, or rather U.S. taxpayers. What do you think, Arnold?
You know, it drives me nuts. I get ticked off sometimes with governments. One of the reasons that, sometimes, most of the time, one of the reasons that TFSAs were created was because of something in the US called, I believe it was a Roth IRA. I think I could be wrong on that terminology, but I think it was the Roth IRAs.
That's correct.
They were patterned very similarly, almost identically to those. And with RRSPs, we have a special tax treaty so that for US tax persons, an RRSP here gets treated just like an IRA down there. So they don't pay tax on it when they do their tax returns. Unlike RRSPs, TFSAs aren't included in any kind of a tax treaty like that. Our TFSAs actually and our ESPs and our DSPs also, but we're not really going to be talking about those much today. But yeah, there are certain account types that for some crazy reason have never been included in these tax treaties, and so it can be problematic. I won't go so far as to say a U.S. taxpayer or U.S. tax person should never have them, but in most cases they probably shouldn't, and probably best to get tax advice from an accountant that is knowledgeable in both. But it's rare. I would say it's rare that it would be worthwhile a U.S. taxpayer having them.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, if you're having, like if you're paying tax in Canada, or if you have TFSA room and you are an American citizen or American taxpayer, it's, basically you're allowed to open a TFSA and invest in it.
You're allowed to, yeah.
You're allowed to. It's just the U.S. doesn't recognize it as a tax-deferred investment account. And you may need to be paying reporting on it. I think there are a lot of people who probably don't know that.
Yeah. And we're not going to be providing nice reports on the income on it because in Canada, you don't need to, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it can cause complications. You do want to talk to your accountant, especially a cross-border specialist, which we would typically recommend anyway for somebody who pays taxes in both countries.
But actually that brings up one more plus of the tax-free accounts. You don't have to do anything tax-wise on them. You don't have to keep track of how much you put in for receipting. You do to make sure you don't go over the limit, but like, there's no receipts. There's nothing. You don't report it to the government. When you take it out, you don't report it to the government. When you make money on it, you don't report it to the government. It just sits there. You don't have to think about it. It grows. And so, it's yet one more plus of the TFSAs.
Yeah. No, we love them. Probably enough for now. We'll move on to the other account types. But as we talked about, next one on our list is the RSP or RRSP, Registered Retirement Savings Plan. And again, this one also has the word savings in its name. So I don't know why this one, I guess it's just been around longer. People know they can and probably should invest in it.
No, it doesn't say savings account. It says savings plan. And I honestly, I think that's actually why there isn't the confusion.
Plan versus account. Yeah. You could be right. The gist with the RSP is that basically when you make a deposit to an RSP, the government, for the most part, considers it that, okay, you've taken this chunk of your income, you've set it aside, presumably for retirement, and it's going to be invested for the long term. Basically, they treat it as though, okay, you didn't actually earn that income this year because you set it aside and saved it to retirement, and you'll get taxed on it later. So basically, let's say you make a $10,000 deposit to your RSP, they will look at your taxable income for the year. They'll pretend you earned 10 grand less than you actually did. So you got a tax deduction for that $10,000 deposit that you made. And basically, yeah, you got upfront tax savings, which is awesome. The downside is that later on, when you withdraw it, again, that's usually in retirement, but doesn't have to be. When you withdraw it, you do get taxed on it then. So really, it's just a tax deferral. And presumably, if you planned right, you're in a lower tax bracket when you withdraw it than when you put the money in.
So I actually like to describe an RRSP like a tax haven island. If you think you've got this little island over there that's not paying any tax, and if you take money that you're earning and dump it over there, the government here treats it like you never earned it. It just sits there and it grows tax free and it does its thing. But when you repatriate the money from that tax haven island, well, then it's like it's income to you and you're getting taxed on it, right? So basically another way of saying what Ben just said, but effectively, yeah, you get this big tax break going in, but you do pay tax on it when you bring it back. And so it's that makes it a better deal if we know that you're going to be in a lower tax bracket in retirement, then or at any point in time that we're going to take the money out. Actually, it doesn't have to be retirement. It could be, if we know that for some reason you're not going to be able to work starting at age 55 or something like that, knowing you'll be in a low tax bracket. If you're in a high one now, it's a fantastic deal. It's a better deal than the TFSA. But if you take it out while you're making those big bucks, then the income from it is getting added on to those big bucks, and you're going to get taxed at a higher rate, and then it's not as good a deal as a TFSA. So it just depends on the use and what ends up happening.
Yeah, a lot of considerations there, and I think there too. With the RSP, I think there's sometimes some confusion, again, just because of how it works in the States. In the States, IRAs, or I think it's individual retirement accounts, they function very similarly to our RSPs here, except down there, if you withdraw from your IRA early, it's taxed as usual, but there's also an additional penalty tax for withdrawing it early.
Right.
In Canada, we don't have anything like that. So if you've been depositing to your RSP and then you're laid off or you're going back to school and you think there's going to be a year where you're very low income, or you're on maternity leave taking care of children, or whatever it is, there can be some sense in doing early RSP withdrawals while your taxable income is lower. And yeah, as Arnold said, like hopefully you're withdrawing at a lower rate. And sort of the ideal case, let's say you're earning lots of income, you're earning 300 grand a year and you're paying a top marginal rate of 53%, you would get a 53% tax break on any money that you put in. Like you'd get that money back on your taxes when you do them for the year. Hopefully later when you withdraw, you're only paying 31% tax rate or whatever it is. And so even without any investment growth whatsoever, you get a cash gain in your pocket just from depositing and getting a higher tax refund and then later paying lower tax.
But going back to what you just said about when somebody gets laid off, it might make sense to actually take some money out. One, I think, important thing for our listeners to know is, unlike the TFSAs, when you take money out of the RRSP, you don't get that room back. It's not
right.
You can contribute more to your RRSP later if you still have more room, but whatever you pulled out, it's not ever going back up. So you do need to be a little bit careful about how you utilize that as well.
Yeah. So probably worth talking about, we talked about with the TFSA, how much room you get and that it's so nice and easy. With the RSP, Your limit is a little bit more complicated.
It's a
Usually,
lot more complicated.
okay, fair enough, fair enough. Usually the best thing to do, I mean, in either case, is to check with the CRA what your limit is. I do always caution people to not trust that number for the first 4 or 5 months of the year, but they will give you a breakdown of what your room was at the beginning of the year. Basically, every year that you earn income, 18% of that earned income up to a cap will become your RSP limit cumulatively for the next year. So again,
But dividends and capital gains are not earned income, right?
yeah,
You gotta,
that's why I
that's
said
like,
earned income. Yeah,
it's complicated.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, basically a portion of your income, typically up to 18% per year, unless you're a really high income earner and then you start hitting a cap in terms of how much you
Or
can put
unless you
in
have
per
a
year.
pension, because then it'll back off the amount that you're getting for the pension as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So best thing to do is to look every year, double check you're not super close to your limit, or if you are, be extra careful in terms of what you're putting in there. Yeah, and then other than that, basically Arnold touched on it before, but RSPs, at some point, the government does want to start taxing you on the money that's in there because they've given you a tax break up front. They want to get what they view as their money, I guess. We digress, don't need to get into that. But basically, when you turn 71, or rather by the end of the year in which you turn 71, you have to turn an RSP into a RIF, so a registered retirement income fund. And now basically there's a set percentage that you must start withdrawing each and every year that goes up on a percentage basis as you age.
And
so
you
it
can
starts,
do that. You can do that prior. You don't have
yeah,
to wait till you're 71. In fact, you can do it anytime. You can do it when you're 50 if you really wanted to. But normally you want to wait until you actually need that regular income. And in fact, actually, yeah, generally my criteria for when to do that is when somebody knows they're going to want a regular income, even if they might want some money out of it. I tell them don't set it up yet. Let's just take it out of the RSP, because the taxation is the same, RSP or RIF. But the RIFs are more designed for a regular steady income stream, and whereas RSPs are not. You can't create a regular steady
yeah.
income stream
Well,
out of it.
and the ultimate taxation is the same between an RSP
That's
and a
right.
RIF. There is some difference in terms of how much is taxed up front. RSPs,
Right.
like when you
The withholding
withdraw it,
tax.
typically they remit a little bit of tax because the financial institution knows that you'll have to pay some tax and they guess as to what that is and remit it. Probably don't need to get too in depth on that either. But yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, whatever they've remitted, that gets shaken out within your tax return,
Right.
and you get the right amount ultimately paid. Other than that, too, I mean, those are sort of the typical RSPs. There are a couple of other plans that, if it's been transferred from a work plan, I think in one of our early episodes, we talked about defined benefit pension plans and defined contribution pension plans and things like that. Those work plans are very similar to an RSP once they get transferred over. They're just a bit more locked in. Again, we've touched on that before, but locked in retirement account, locked in RSP, etc.
And it's worth mentioning as well, you can, and some people find these confusing, you can also set up a spousal RRSP, which basically means it's owned by your spouse, but you're making the contribution. So you get the tax break. The limit on that is still your contribution limit. You can't use your spouse's limit. It's whatever the limit is for you, that's the most that you can put in there. Now, these used to be critical to use way back in the day, because we didn't have the same kind of income splitting in retirement as we do now. Today, most people can split their income quite well in retirement. And so spousal accounts are just not as important as they used to be. I still kind of like to equalize assets and income generally as much as I can or to plan for that in retirement. But whereas it used to be absolutely critical to get the best tax outcome possible, today, because you've got this income splitting option, it's not that big a deal. Nonetheless, many people still have spousal RRSPs, and still recommend them. But just remember that's owned by your spouse, but it means you're the one making the contribution.
Yeah, which, as you pointed out, can be a very nice way to shift the tax burden onto the lower income earning spouse. If that fits within the plan and you can't do it other ways through the income splitting in retirement. So yeah, no, I love spousal RSPs too. They're a great plan.
Actually, one little trick that I have used, I don't know if you've ever done this, Ben, with any of your clients, but we've had a couple of situations where we've had clients who had both a spousal RSP and a regular RSP, and then that spouse got laid off, and they weren't making that much money, but the other spouse was still making very good money. And so what we ended up doing for a couple of years was we would take out $5, $10, $20,000 out of the regular RRSP. So the spouse not making much money got either took some money out with zero tax or a bit of tax. They gave it to their spouse, who then contributed it to the spousal RRSP, right? So out of the regular RRSP, the low income earners RRSP, comes out in a very low tax, gives it to the high income earner who puts it into the spousal RSP. So it's back into the same hands of the same person. But now all of a sudden, that high income earner is saving tax at 30, 40, 50%. Whereas their spouse paid tax at 0, 10, or 20. So it ended up being just shifting money around, picking up some extra money. So there are some tricks that you can do with it. They don't usually come into play. But once in a while we can come up with some cool stuff to save you some extra tax.
Yeah, just a word of caution though. I mean, with the spousal RSP rules too, there are the attribution rules and things like that. So it's definitely worthwhile speaking with an expert before trying to do some of those strategies yourself. Just if you deposit to a spousal RSP and then withdraw it within a few years, you haven't shifted the tax burden. It gets attributed right back to the contributor.
That's right.
And so just things to keep in mind before you start.
That would only work if you're taking it out of the regular RSP.
Yeah.
And if anybody on the call here is having dinner with Carney next week, do not say anything to them about this strategy.
There you go. Perfect. So we're going to touch on the non-registered next, but I did want to just touch on also, there are some other, we'll call them specialty accounts maybe, that just really quickly, they might be even better for you than a TFSA or an RSP because there are additional either grant money or better taxation on both fronts. And so those just really quickly would be something like a first home savings account, great for people trying to save for their first home, education savings plan, great if you're saving for kids' education, and registered disability savings plans. So if you know anyone under the age of 59 with a disability, those are some great places to get some extra. Like those are the situations where we might consider opening those accounts before even doing a TFSA or RSP. If you want us to talk more about those particular instances, do leave a comment after you're done watching, and we'll take that into consideration.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, education savings plans seem to be very well known, but every stat that I've seen has indicated that the disability savings plans are way underutilized. And so I would highlight, like, if you know anybody that has a disability, ask them, have you got a disability savings plan, a registered disability savings plan?
Well,
these things are incredibly beneficial.
Up to 90,000 of free government money.
Free money.
It's bizarre.
Free money.
It's bizarre that people don't know about them. That's what's bizarre.
Yeah. Now, do you have any stats on first home savings accounts? I get the impression that they are better utilized, that most people know that they're a good option.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say most people. I don't have the stats. I don't know off the top of my head, but you're right. It feels like that's been more in the zeitgeist. But that might also only be true because I personally really tried to make sure that everyone I knew about them.
Right.
So it's a little bit hard to have a really bird's eye view on this topic for me, but maybe our viewers can let us know. Do you know what a first home savings account is?
There you go.
So let's circle back now to the non-registered account, just chat about that a little bit more. Again, we've already touched on it. Usually better to start with the other accounts. But once those are done, once you no longer have any room left, should you invest in a non-registered account, Arnold?
Of course, if you have spare money, what else are you going to do with it? Well, you could spend it, go to Vegas, but no, if you're looking to invest, you start with where you can get the biggest bang for the buck. That's your RSPs, your TFSAs, but then beyond that, just a regular investment account, and it gets confusing, right? Because we call them in the industry. You may hear us refer to a cash investment account or a cash savings account or an investment account or a non-registered account.
Margin account,
Margin account
open
would be
account.
open account is a very common one. That's right. All of those are the same, except that a margin account also you can borrow money against it and stuff like that. But most of them are synonymous. So it does get really kind of confusing. But what's great, no limit. Like there is no limit on how much money you can invest. You can come to us with $10 million, $100 million. We will open up a non-registered account for you. $1 billion. I don't have any billion-dollar clients. Do you have any billion-dollar clients?
No,
We're
I do not. I
welcoming
think you would
billion-dollar
know.
clients. But the thing to remember is, a non-registered account is going to get taxed. It's like we were talking about before. If you buy a house and it's not your principal residence, you make rent, you're going to have to pay tax on that rent. When you sell the house, you've got a capital gain. Hopefully, you're going to have to pay tax on that capital gain. The same is true with a non-registered account. It's the same kind of thing. If you buy something in that non-registered account that pays you interest, you're going to have to pay tax on that interest. If you buy something that pays dividends, you'll have to pay tax on the dividends. And when you sell whatever you've got in it, you'll have to pay tax on the capital gain.
Yeah. And we'll touch briefly on how those are taxed. I don't know if we want to get too deeply into it, but basically in those different types, I mean, if you earn interest, that's going to be taxable at your full tax rate. So sometimes you'll see people say, oh, it's taxable at 100%, or, they're contrasting it versus capital gains, which are taxed at 50%. That doesn't mean that 100% of the money you earn gets taxed away. It means that it's taxed at your full marginal tax rate. So whatever it is that you're paying on your income, if you're in a 40% marginal tax rate, then if you earn interest, you pay 40% on that interest in taxes.
So do you think most of our viewers know what a marginal tax rate is?
I think a fair number do, but marginal tax rate is the top tax rate.
It's your top tax rate. It's what you pay on the extra dollar earned, right? Yeah.
No, fair enough. I try to define things as much as possible when we're talking about them, trying to be accessible and give people the scoop on how all these things work. But yeah, basically in Canada we have that graduated tax rate, so that the more you earn, each incremental dollar gets taxed at a higher rate, they're within bands, but basically, someone earning 200 grand pays a different top tax rate than someone earning 60 grand. On the first 60 grand, they're paying the same rate in taxes, but then it's a higher rate on anything above that.
Right. Well, yeah, and as Ben said, interest, it gets taxed just like your salary or just like rent. Those are all taxed at the full tax rate, whatever your marginal tax rate is. So yeah, if it's 30, you're going to pay 30%. If it's 40, you're going to pay 40%. Dividends and capital gains, though, are taxed quite preferentially. Capital gains at half that. So, again, if you're in a 40% tax bracket, you'd only pay 20% on a capital gain. Dividends are a little more complicated. Most people, most income earners pay almost nothing on dividends. And in fact, there's a band that actually gets negative taxed on dividends. I love dividends.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Because depending on, and you know what, I probably should have in advance pulled up the what the thresholds are there, but there are certain thresholds. Maybe you can do it, Ben, while I'm talking. I think around 40 or 50 grand, up to there, you're paying 0 to -% in taxes. So in other words, if you earn $100 in dividends,
grand,
how much?
For 2025? 57.
57. Yeah. So if you earn $100 in dividends, you don't pay tax on that, and in fact, you get $6 back in taxes that you paid somewhere else. Right? Like, how does that happen? And then it goes up to 1.5% after that, and then it does ratchet up. And if you're in a high tax bracket, you are going to pay 20% taxes on your dividends. But for a lot of people, it's almost tax-free or negative. So more complicated, definitely. We won't get into how that technically works because it doesn't look like you're getting it. It really doesn't, but they are awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, that's mostly about it. I think the last thing we wanted to touch on with the non-registered, and unless you wanted to chat more about the taxation there, but just really is that unlike the other accounts, like if I have a tax-free savings account, I can't have it jointly held with someone else. I'm not married, but even if I had a spouse, we can't have a joint TFSA. Whereas with a non-registered account, you can do that. So you can jointly hold a joint non-registered account, and you can jointly contribute money to it. You can split the taxes 50-50, which is probably the most common way to do that, is to, if you're holding it together, treat it that way for tax purposes as well. I don't know if you want to get into that as well, the tax treatment of how.
I think the only thing I would add there is just, typically between spouses, it's sort of a 50-50 thing, but you could easily, I've seen a few situations where people have said, well, I'm contributing 3/4 of the money, this person's contributing one quarter of the money, and so then they pay tax on the same proportion. When you do your tax return, there's actually a little spot with most software where you say my share of these gains is whatever percent, and so usually we're putting in 50 for spouses, but yeah, it can be, well, it could be 0, 100, 75, 25. It can be whatever you want it to be.
Cleaner and easier to do when it's come from something obvious, right? This came from that spouse's inheritance, or this spouse sold a house and, this big bucket of money. Most of the time, though, people are doing it on a joint household basis, and they split it 50-50.
I think it's worth noting, it's important to be consistent about it.
Yeah.
You can't flip-flop and say, no, this year I'm going to give it to Joe, and this year we're going to give it to Jane. CRA will be very unhappy with you if you do that.
And to have some backup for it if you are treating it differently.
Yeah, that's right. So, I don't know. Have we talked about everything we want to talk to about accounts?
I think we've done it. Yep.
All right. Well, hey, thank you everybody for joining us in today's episode of the Retire in BC podcast. We talked about TFSAs, RRSPs, non-registered accounts, and hopefully
and a few others. Yeah,
and a few others, and hopefully have helped you understand how you can use those effectively, and the importance of, in some of those cases, the critical importance of getting professional advice. If you've got questions about these accounts, or want to describe, or want us to describe one of the other account types that we touched on, leave us a comment. We do listen to what you guys have to say. We would love to hear from you. If there's a particular account type or a particular topic you'd love us to talk about, let us know. We would love to talk about it.
Yeah, let us know. And thanks again, everyone, for tuning in.
Thanks for listening.
Next time. Bye. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast may not necessarily reflect those of IPC Securities Corporation or IPC Investment Corporation. The information provided is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be construed as financial, legal, or tax advice. The hosts and creators of this podcast assume no liability for actions taken based on the content discussed.